Hi guys, today I'm going to discuss the NSDA motion that on balance economic globalization is a threat to the national interests of countries. I'm going to talk about the con side of the motion exclusively in this video. I've discussed the pro side in a different video, right? So look at that video first. I think is a better way to approach because there's some things that I discussed there that may be relevant here. But if you've already started watching this video, hey, keep watching, you're not going to lose anything. Okay, so economic globalization, the definition of which you should know by now, it's about the free movement of goods, services, capital, technology, labor, all those things. It's basically a free trade debate. But as I mentioned in the other video, trade also is related to politics or culture or value, and there'll be a little bit of space to discuss those things in this debate too. So I'm going to look at the context a little bit, as in the mindset and how you should frame the debate, and then look at three arguments. Now these arguments, as always, are not guaranteed arguments. There's no such thing. If an argument is guaranteed to win, it's a truism. But these are points of reflection and areas of which you should pursue a line of argumentation. You'll need to do more research around these things, right? So don't just stop at this video, but hopefully this will give you an idea of where you can do more research and how you can run your case. So firstly, in terms of the context, I think opposition needs to go into this debate with a kind of opportunity mindset, right? You think that it's really up to the nation to make the best of any opportunity. All free trade does is present a place for you to play, and it's up to you to play, okay? And what's a threat to the nation isn't free trade, but a threat to the nation is poor politics of the nation, it's an inability to take advantage of the opportunity, it's bad strategy. Right, so that's the problem. Bad strategy is the problem. You shouldn't blame free trade. Okay, and you say what you need to have is, if you have this opportunity mindset, then you want trade, and the problem is more trade. The problem is a lack of trade, right? And the solution is to have more trade, right? Rules are bad. In a free and open system, you can compete as much as possible, and you have to trust the market to balance itself out, right? I'd be very careful, and you may be tempted to, on op, argue about limitations, okay? And it depends on the debate. If the Gov side has a very kind of protectionist model, then on op, you can argue for responsible trade or informed trade, or having basic protections like, labor laws, or protections against child workers, or protections for minimum wage, and you can say those things are ways you can have responsible trade, right? And maybe even do a little bit more. But if the Gov side has a very kind of reduced model, then on op, you need to tend towards having a freer market. It doesn't mean you should argue to abolish like minimum wage, but you should say those things, you have to be very careful about the limitations you will have on the market, and you argue for having more information, right? You say when people are more informed and people are really well educated, and when people have options and they can choose, then the market will always win. And what you need to do is to ensure that those things exist, right? That people have the information, people have the education, people have the options. So you will ban or you will abolish monopolies, right? That's unfair trade. That's not a free trade system. But as long as there's good competition, people will always win, and that's the system that you want to get, okay? So just establishing that, I think that's really important, because if you don't really do that, you could end up contradicting yourself, okay? So that established, let's go into the arguments. The first argument I think you should run is the one around the opportunity mindset, right? So you can call this opportunity mindset, or free trade is the best for everybody, or growth and competition is best, or whatever. But basically this is an argument around why free trade is better, and you should look at it as an opportunity, and you can grow. And the point of this argument is to also kind of shift the blame a little bit, okay? But first you need to you show how this creates an opportunity for countries to grow. The problem isn't a lack of rules, the problem is too many rules, right? And if you have free trade and competition, then the companies or the countries that do really well will go to the top, the ones that don't will go to the bottom, and when at the bottom they need to develop further and they can grow and move again to the top, okay? As long as consumers have good choice, and as long as you don't have monopolies, everything will work out, right? And as long as you invest the benefits of that trade into the right things, right? So the argument that you're making is basically that the problem isn't so much or why some countries haven't done well, the problem isn't so much of free trade, but how the leaders of those countries have exploited the trade. Okay? In some countries, they've invested the benefits into long-term outcomes, right? Into education, into better infrastructure. In others, they've invested into short-term things. Okay? And in the countries that have invested into long-term things, those companies or those countries have done really, really well. Countries like China, like Singapore, like South Korea, like many of the Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia, right? And if you look at Latin America or even countries across the African continent, the countries that have made smart investments tend to do much better than the countries that don't. Okay? So what you're trying to do in this argument is you're saying that free trade is just a tool, but it's a really good tool. You know, it's a tool and it's a philosophy where the good, the best will rise, and it encourages people to work really, really hard. The opposite of that is an ideology which leaves power in the hands of a few. Okay, but you're saying, oh, but this tool needs to be exploited in a smart way. And if some nations are threatened, it's not because of the ideology, it's because of how those nations have chosen to progress, right? And you can say that this happens in any nation, right? Not only small nations will always suffer, but small nations can do really, really well, like Singapore or South Korea, and some big established nations can suffer, right? We see America suffering now. They went through a huge economic crisis, and Trump being really upset and trying to push in protectionist policies because the majority of Americans feel like they're losing out to China. You see many European countries, you know, Italy, Spain, and the UK also suffering economically and losing out to Asian countries like China and like South Korea, right? And you had countries like Brazil and India, and also on the verge of coming up and really, really growing. Okay, so you say it's really about how you approach trade, not whether or not you trade or not. And it's a huge opportunity. The risk is in how you take advantage of that opportunity, right? So that's the first argument. The second one is, I think you can drill down a little bit into those developmental benefits. So not just talking about how trade in general, as a philosophy, is good or bad, but showing specifically from a national interest why free trade or a globalized economy is a potential and opportunity for them to grow, right? On three things I think we can discuss. The first thing is it allows countries to specialize, and this is especially valuable for smaller countries and countries that don't have resources, right? So again, countries like Korea or Singapore that don't have natural resources can focus on doing things like manufacturing or value-added services, and they can grow. Countries like the Cayman Islands, the Bermudas can focus on financial services, right? As like London or well, city, but England is trying to do now, focusing on financial services in some sectors, focusing on manufacturing on others. But basically, having a globalized trade means some countries can focus on doing things which they do really well, and then take from other countries things which they do really well. And this is an advantage for countries that don't do everything, right? And especially countries that are quite small. Okay, so that's the first advantage. It allows countries to specialize. Secondly, it allows countries to develop much faster, because now countries can import and attract expertise and capital, right? So if I'm a poorish country that was kind of closed, and I need to build roads, I need to build factories, I need to build everything, I don't need to do that from scratch. I can do that by attracting companies to come in and build those things, right? And I can do that in a competitive and a smart way. I can say, you know, I have a bid. You know, if a Chinese company or an American company or a German company, whoever gives me the best deal, whoever builds the most roads or dams, to you I will give the contract, and you get a first mover's advantage, you know, in my market. So it's a win for you, and there's a win for me, right? And that allows a country to develop much quicker. And this has really worked for some countries, not so much for others, and who have squandered their profits. Okay, so that's the second advantage for countries. Countries can develop much faster by attracting that capital to come in a globalized economy versus in a closed economy. It's much harder for them to do that. And thirdly, it allows countries to react to change. And this means that, you know, because the markets are more open and capital is more fluid, things can change much more quickly. But that means a country that is smarter can also be more nimble, right? So even if you're a developed economy and you see things changing, you can pivot and you can move to something else very quickly because the market is open. If you're trading with one country and that country doesn't do very well, or that country is shutting down, I can move very quickly, right? So if Trump doesn't want to buy my steel, I move and sell steel to someone else. If China is trying to shift away from these types of cars, I can move and sell them to another country that isn't, right? Or I can change and do something which this country wants to do, okay? So again, you have to be smart, but in a global world, you can do that. In a world where it's harder for you to trade, then I'm locked into America. If America changes, then I'm stuck, right? I need to start finding a new country and renegotiate something. It's harder for me to pivot, okay? So these three arguments show how it's good for countries that are starting out or that have unique advantages, but even countries that are kind of developed, it's easy for them in a global environment to pivot, to change, to develop, and to grow, and then it's better for their national interests, right? The third thing is, and this is a slightly kind of broader argument about culture and sense of global belonging, not so much about the economy, but I think there is a relationship. And this argument is about how in a globalized economy, it leads to a closer, richer world and nation, right? It allows us all to share in more common things and values, right? In a globalized world, I'm more familiar with the values, culture, language, product, traditions, food of another country. In fact, I consume those things more. I grow up in an environment where the things that I use are made in many different countries, right? So I enrich the lives of the people in those countries by purchasing their things, and they enrich mine by purchasing my things, right? I consume their food, their media, their language, their culture, and this leads to a world that is more informed of each other and it's closer to each other. Sometimes it leads to people being threatened, but again, I think that's you can put that down to how individual countries have managed the success or lack of success of their trade. But broadly, and where it's worked, it's led to a world where we are more closer with each other, we're more well informed of each other's values, right? So because you're not just buying a thing, you're buying a product that is related to someone's life in another part of the world, and you buy their ideas and you buy their values, right? And this also means that you can develop more innovative things. In a more globalized world, it's easier for people from different parts of the world to work together and develop a solution, right? And you're not just developing an empty product. Products are solutions to things. Products are medicine, healthcare, products education, products safer roads, safer cars, safer buildings, right? All of these things, a higher quality product leads to higher quality lives for people everywhere. And in a globalized economy, it's easier for us to get these things and thus enrich our lives, right? And at the same time, contribute towards the creation of these things, okay? So you can see that this is a bit of a large, fluffy argument in a way, but done well, I think it's quite powerful because it moves beyond the notion of a product just being a TV or a toothbrush, but it looks at how our ideas and our values are shaped by trade and can bring them together, right? Now, there's still a debate about the interests of nations, so connect this to the nation and say this enriches the people in the nation and it enriches that nation, and it allows that nation to benefit more, right? So if that nation is benefiting from highly advanced, safer, healthier products, the people in that nation benefits. If the nation needs to develop a solution for unique problems, that nation benefits from having more global trade, and at the same time the nation contributes to that, okay? So that's my kind of con approach to this debate. I hope that was useful. Remember the context, right? The context is one about having more opportunity and not blaming trade, but blaming individual problems or strategies of a nation, and that's where the threat lies, not taking full advantage or proper advantage of that trade. Relying on an open market to do well and relying on classic competition sort of theories to do well, but having a caveat around education, having caveats around preventing monopolies, right? And that's bad for trade. In terms of your arguments, talk about the opportunity, talk about how countries can take advantage, come up with some examples of countries that have done really well. I've given you a few, but I'm sure you can come up with more. Secondly, talk about how nations can develop, right? So this is not just trade as a whole, but specifically like if you are nation X, small nation, new nation, or developed nation, you can use a global world to get more capital, to specialize, and to pivot and to change very quickly. And finally, talk about the global values of trade, right? How a global trade system or economy allows us to become a closer, more richer world, to share more with people around the world, to create more useful, innovative things quicker, and to benefit from things and live in a safer, richer, high quality life. High quality life. Okay, so I hope that has enriched your quality of life. And good luck debating this motion, and good luck at the NSDA. Thanks.